Plus, Ultra presents The Grey Lodge, Friday Night Gnostic Mass, Cargo Cult Life, Arc Null, Live on X, which is the 10 and the 11, so we come together in space and transcending space and time in consent. This is a speculative, Gnostic, speculative, tantric, speculative, Kabbalistic group. Obviously, we call it Metamagicians for the New Aeon, and I am Jin the Ninja, well, retired ninja, and I host a show called Threshold Saints, of which most people in our small, what started as a small magicians group chat, and sort of has grown into what I'm speculatively calling, or perhaps cheekily calling, the Nexion. And so it's just become like a generative place where we speak about speculative metaphysical ideas and like the way the universe and the world is, or could be, or perhaps even just how we perceive things. So obviously, I don't do it alone. We're joined by Professor Solar Exile, Matt Murrah, I think, is coming, and Dr. William Birkin, Joshua the Branch, and of course, our new, we'll call her a pillar of stability, Eros up. So I did an interview with Eros and on her YouTube channel, so everybody obviously can check out all her stuff on YouTube, but also you can check that out especially. And that's basically what it is. And so tonight, I'll let everybody introduce themselves. I won't even do a long intro, but I kind of did a kind of riff on the popularity of Vedanta and its kind of like interpretation in like the Western metaphysical quote unquote community, or the Western occult community. And so that is obviously the kind of general theme of where I was going with cargo cult life. But I also think that there are interesting ideas that maybe we can discuss, or debate or hash out, and let's see what happens. So I'll let everybody plug or just say a small word or whatever, however many words they want about themselves. And I'll start with Solar, and then we'll do Eros, and then we'll keep going.
Hey guys, Solar Exile, wandering Zug Chimpa. No idea how I got here. Happy to be here. Maybe I'll stick around for a little bit. Yeah, I feel like we're in the Solar appears on a lot of stuff and everyone gets sick of him phase of the Grey Lodge, and then I'll disappear for another few months. But yeah, a lot of stuff kind of in the pipeline in the short to medium term future. Grateful to be a part of all of that. And yeah, lovely to see you guys all tonight.
Thank you, Solar, and trust me, nobody gets sick or bored of you. I think I actually like it. I think it's fun. I think people have fun with the bicker banter, as I call it. So yeah, I think it's all good. So come as much as you want, or not, or whatever. It's always going to consent. Eros, please plug your YouTube channel. Sorry, plug your YouTube channel and just give some words about what you're about.
Hi, hey Jen, hey Solar, Cassandra, Truth, Dumenti, Frog Blocker. I have a YouTube channel, Eros Up, and I study metaphysics a lot, and a lot of Hellenistic astrology, and archetypal studies. I would say that's my main jam, and I'm happy to be here with you guys. So yeah, excited.
Well, thank you, Eros. I will shout out also Dumento Mori. Hopefully him and I can get a recording in, and then our next Grey Lodge, maybe he'll come up and speak. Let's see. What's up? He's also a podcaster, and I think very interested in magic, but I think kind of a neophyte. But we all start out somewhere, right? So I'll give him a break a little. Frau Blocker, thank you very much. One of my favorite ex-Twitter poets, also a member of the Grey Lodge, and definitely a friend of Sachki, and friend to me, of course. And so thank you so much for your support and for joining so many lodge spaces, and just being in the GC. I think it's great. Cassandra, obviously, Chibi Yusa, the sort of sky wife of the Aeon of the Daughter. Thank you so much for coming. Obviously, Cassandra is Etsy, a purveyor, YouTube content creator, and a service. I think she also offers metaphysical services like readings and those kinds of things. And yeah, Cassandra's great, so everybody can check that out. Of course, Vanessa, Truth and Dies, Etsy store purveyor, and also check her out on IG, which is really where I think her primary store, like the metaphysical or the digital, maybe the same thing, storefront exists for all her stuff, which is awesome. And obviously, she did send me. Well, I mean, yeah, she sent me a shirt, and I really, really hugely appreciate it. And I just want to say, like, really quality and. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I really appreciated it and all your support over the last year of like me going on rejects. You're always in the chat, and it is nice. It is like cool to see like people. It's not like I don't want fans. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it is like nice to have like people that you recognize, that you're in dialogue with, and I think that that's what the whole point of the project really was to like for me, lonely gin cell in the mountains, like to meet other people who are interested in similar ideas. So, okay, so I guess I have to sort of start this, unless Solar has like any like or Eros or anyone has any like questions that they want to start with. I'll have to start.
No. I guess I have to own a bit of responsibility since I've been forcing my riffing on Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's Gita commentary on you slightly, enough for me to sort of burn myself out on it. So maybe that's why it's part of the mix tonight. But I don't really, I don't know where you want to go with it. So yeah, but that's on me. You can all hate me for that. It's not on Jin.
No, but the thing is like I did start out doing the Mahavijja Tantras. I mean, you know this. So I won't repeat it 50 times. Eros also heard me talk about it for 2.5 hours. So, but so it's not like I'm not a hater. I'm really not a hater of Vedanta. Like how people perceive that I am. I'm just personally a tantric. I personally like tantra. I that is what agrees with me. We were talking about like I know you and Eros like have this interest in the soul complexes. Like if you want to say like whatever soul part of my soul complex, tantra speaks to that. The better part. So that's all I am. So I just don't really understand the normie layer. Okay, Solar, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so can we get a 3-sentence or less distinction between just so we're all on the same page from the start here, how we're defining Tantra relative to its distinguishing like features from Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta specifically?
Okay, well, so let's start with this. Tantras are inherently related to the Puranas, not the Upanishads, not the Vedas, the Puranas. And through the Puranas, there's other texts called Shastras, which are ritual manuscripts, like how to worship. They're not inherently tantric. Even Vaishnava temples, Shaivite temples will use a text called a Shastra. And even tantric temples don't use a tantric Shastra all the time. So it depends. So, but there can be tantric Shastras. But there is a body of literature called tantras that are discursive in nature. It's almost always by Rava and by Ravi, the god and his wife, speaking in dialogue. It can be other deities too, but that's the most typical, even for Buddhist tantra, is discursive. Like Buddha and his consort are speaking, and she is asking him questions on the nature of reality, and he is responding. And so but the whole sort of multiverse or cosmology that they dwell within really exists in the Puranas. The Puranas also have Sambodhya Gaya, which is twilight language, which you can use if you know the mantric formulas from Sanskrit. This is obviously tantric Sanskrit, so this is not the same as Vedic Sanskrit, and it's not exactly the same as Buddhist Sanskrit if you understand the idea of bijas or seed syllables. It's not that it's so dissimilar. There are bijas, obviously, most of the bijas are in common. Like Buddhist Tantra will use all the same bijas as Indian Tantra. But there are like preferences in pronunciation, just little variations, how they're constructed, like how the mantra itself is constructed, and which mantras for which deities and are considered higher or lower or secret or whatever it is. So tantras are basically a ritual methodology of the carnal ground. This is often where the discourses take place between God and his wife. They take place on we'll call it a 9-petal, it's an 8-petaled lotus with a central point, which is the 9. So that is called the Maha Smashana, so the carnal ground of ultimate reality. It's considered to have 8 gates, which are guarded by specific time kings or Ganapati, or different ways to sort of conceptualize it. And so the idea is, conceptually, the Upasaka will walk through each of the 9 gates, which leads to Smashana, another Maha Smashana, another carnal ground of ultimate reality, which then corresponds to different directionalities, different deities. But really, all of those things are just mnemonic devices, and they also are bijas. So all of those things contain the primordial words, which, if you're reciting the mantra, you're sort of allowing to arise in your mind, but also on the carnal ground, because this is also where a lot of people, especially in the medieval time, would practice. Now, we're going to go a little more non-dual and a little more Buddhist, a little more towards Nepal, which is okay, I think. And we're going to say that the Mahasmashana is also the same as the garden, meaning that the sort of place that we dwell upon in our daily life is also the Mahasmashana, but it's also the garden at the same time, both non-dual. So this is kind of the idea, is that you don't necessarily need inherently the geographic location of the actual carnal ground or the cremation ground to practice Tantra. You can take it outside of it because it's a conceptual space, the carnal ground. So you're taking these tantric texts, which are discursive, which have sorcery in them, which will say different things. They'll have medicinal ideas, they'll have herbal remediations for diseases, but it's magic and herbal at the same time. It's not just like a Tarvita section on herbal medicine or on Ayurvedic medicine. It's not like that. It's also, but everything has a secret meaning, and there are like ingredients and all that. Okay, Solar, sorry. Yes, please go ahead.
So I'm smirking here as I like don't want to open Pandora's box, but I feel like at some point it would be interesting because you would know the history of this specifically, right? Is there kind of an interplay in the development of Ayurveda, like medicinal practices, sort of in counterpart to tantric magical medicinal practices? Like, were those things kind of developed either one before the other? I mean, not necessarily it has to be either one was developed sort of before the other or canonized before the other, or they sort of developed like sort of contrapuntally, right? Like in dialogue with each other. Like, do you know much about that out of curiosity?
I know a little bit about it. I'm not an expert in Ayurveda by any means, but I'll say that Ayurveda came first because it comes from like a Vaishnava sort of. There's a broad. It's like a canon of texts. So that's basically Ayurveda. So it's more closely related to like it's not Vedic, but it's more closely related to the Vedic canon. But it was really codified in the Atharvadas. Now, to speak to the intersection, what is really interesting is that a lot of Tantra also comes out of the Atharvadas, as this is the first really codification of Vedic, what we call Vedic astrology, but it's not really Vedic. It's really Tantric astrology. But the thing is that Jyotisha, like what people say they practice online or in real life, that's not really what that's like that's the superficial part of it. That's not the sort of full real, it's not really what it means. It's always alchemical for us. So, or for a tantric anyway. So as you know, as you've heard me say 10 million times, I'm sorry, but yeah, so basically that's what it is. So like, yes, there is a convergence of these things, especially in a text which I've recommended to pretty much everybody, but I know Solar, I've said like to you, like go read the Garuda Purana, simply because it has a lot of these kind of like magical herbal relationships, but it also gives a really good, it's like the Culpeper for Indians. Like it says planetary associations, and why. It like logically. Sorry, I'm just bringing Joshua up. It logically associates them with the planets, including obviously Rahu Ketu. So we have obviously this. So, but yeah, the Garuda Purana, that's a primary text for like the interplay, like the sort of mingling of the two ideas, because the Garuda Purana is usually considered a Vaishnava text. There is no such thing as Vaishnava tantras. Yes, they did have tantric shastras, so ritual prescriptions for worship. That is not the same thing as a tantra. Tantra is a specific kind of text, right, that gives magical operations, but also like a discourse on the nature of reality. That's really what a tantra is. It's about expanding your mind. Yes, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, this is great. And I don't mean to be like pedantic about these things and like or asking questions that kind of like encourage you to be pedantic. But I think it's really helpful because our group skews obviously, well, I would say Dharmic, but specifically Buddhist, right? And so even I, as like an actual like Dharmic practitioner, I lack context, and I can only imagine that people who maybe aren't like actually practicing some form of the tradition lack even more context, right? Because our exposure, not just through you, but kind of, people who cluster around you tend to be Vajrayana practitioners, right? So for us, like we have our notion of Tantra is sort of inexorably bound up with, like Buddhist notions, right? Every direction that's sort of gone historically, textually, ritually, magically, and ontologically, right? And so I think it can be helpful to kind of disambiguate those things. Like for example, like one of my main points of contrast as I'm working, because I'm obviously a Dzogchen guy, and then trying to like approach Advaita Vedanta, for me, it's largely like an ontological difference, like sort of like theoretical differences that in practice might actually not be so evident, at least until when you get to a certain point, is sort of how you interpret different meditative states, things like that. But that's sort of a very different sort of like point of approach or like vector of approach, right? I'm seeing different distinctions that otherwise like wouldn't be so evident, right? And so like from the sort of tantric perspective, I have no point of reference with respect to like Puranic or Hindu tantra, right? I know it exists. I know like a little bit, right? Like I've read a couple of the texts. But all of those kind of layers that we're sort of mentioning have gotten all smushed together sort of for me, right? Because they're all compressed just because I only have really ever seen in depth sort of one side of this dividing line, right? So I think this stuff is really helpful for us to kind of keep in mind and sort of understand as a framework. I don't know.
No, I think that that's really good. And it is interesting because tantras are a text. So they're clearly related to Bina. So they're like more solidified, codified in reality, right? They're the method. They're the method, the ritual method. It's not the same as a Shastra, which can also be tantric again, but tantras are different. The prescriptions for how to solve, remediate astrological conditions, spiritual conditions, um, ontological conditions. This is a big part of what tantra is. Even quote unquote Kriya tantra. Like tantras are a cycle. They're considered to be bound in a cycle. This is especially true for Buddhist tantra, but this is also true for like Sri Vijja, like some of the southern goddess tantras. They're always in a cycle. They always contain like they'll have higher discourse ideas. Like okay, so we've always said we're a speculative Kalachakra space. So let's use that as an example. The Kalachakra is not just the root text; it's the entire cycle of both commentaries and other tantras that are bound with it. They may or may not be seemingly related to it when you read them, but it's because you're also receiving specific kinds of instruction, maybe. And so oral instruction, so you're sort of understanding the relationship, or you're hardcore intensively practicing them. So then what happens is speculatively, you gain non-dual gnosis and are able to then understand a deeper layer of the Sambodhya Gaya, of the twilight language. That is also can be true. So the reality is it's a very praxis-based thing. It has to be like Hokmah, Bina together. That's always what it is. That's always what Dath is. So I think it's really useful, and I'm glad that you're asking questions, because I feel like it's a little easier for me to not wander so far off the carnal ground and sort of stick to pathway. But so yeah, tantras. Okay, so they're magical methodologies. They can be related to the carnal ground, as I said. There often are, but this can be a conceptual idea. There are multiple kinds of tantra. The tantra that's very popular among LHP practitioners is Kali Kola, but and the way they understand it is not really what it is, but there is a degree that there of penetration, we'll say, or like they understand some density of it. I'm fine with it. Like I can't control what other people do. I don't necessarily agree with that formation. Obviously, it can go very weird, and like in Nepal, there's a lot of like Kali Kola, sort of like anti-cosmic death cults, and kind of like weird like Western Eastern. Convergence of these kinds of ideas. I'm forgetting the name, Miguel Serrano, obviously a big purveyor of those ideas, but it's not just him. But there's multiple kinds of tantra. It doesn't just focus on Kali. It doesn't just focus on Mahakala. It doesn't just focus on Bhairava. It's actually a complex. That's really what tantra is. It's a complex of sorcery and ontology at the same time, converging. It's discourses, so its debate is encouraged. Um, People are experimenting with different methodologies, different systems. So that's really what we're talking about. What I'm talking about, at least when I talk about tantra, I'm talking about the complex, and specifically I like to locate it in Nepal, because Nepal is really the place where tantra developed. Like it's Nepal and Kashmir, but it's really we're going to say Nepal because obviously Kashmir became Islamified in the 13th century. We won't get into that whole thing, but it's just well preserved in Nepal, even if the people don't necessarily understand. It's accessible to a degree, and it's accessible also from the exterior, like just from the sort of artistic and iconographic representations. So this is obviously another big part of Tantra is iconography, is how to relate to the goddess or to the deity in their multiple sort of depictions. And wrathful deities are often what's associated with Tantra, or sensual deities, we'll call them. Those are also associated with Tantra. Those don't necessarily have to be. You can have peaceful deities that can be very tantric, like the 11-headed Avalokitesvara, a Lord of Compassion. There's a Tonka, a whole mandala that he composes himself. And he's the main deity. He has 11 heads. That's obviously, I would argue, has like that's a very Kabbalistic sort of tree of life sort of parallel, and so that can also be tantra. That's what I'm saying, is that it doesn't, what people tend to think of it as, it's really just it's mind magic. It's like very chaos magic, but it's using ritual text to sort of get there. So you're reading the discourses, you're kind of penetrating the layers of reality, disrupting the consensus reality, the sort of normative ways of thinking in your own mind, and you're resolving the paradox and sort of playing with the polarities. Yes, Solar, please go ahead.
So I'm curious if you have any like, speculative explanation for a sort of like cultural and organizational divergence that I've noticed, right? Um, so in the Vajrayana context, there are a lot of institutions out there, usually fairly small, but so on the one hand, right, you can kind of like walk into a Dharma center and ask for the like 130 IQ version of the thing, and like some guy, maybe for free, maybe for like a nominal teaching fee, will basically hook you up with the 130 IQ version of the thing. And if that's too much for you, you can be like, please give me the 110 version, sir. And he's like, okay, here you go, sir. It's pretty like straightforward. It's pretty legit. Tragically, a lot of these places are like really underfunded and just generally under resourced, right? Like the just for reference, like the place where I'm going to be receiving my second weekend of Togyal instruction, they just made it through like another brutal East Coast winter without like a functioning heater, right? Like it's that kind of level of a thing, right? But it's pretty much like you get what you came for, to the point where there's not a lot of guidance telling you what you should be aiming for or what you should get, right? There's no like onboarding to Vajrayana Buddhism where you're like guided towards like, hey, maybe like learn this, here, do some Aryatara practice or something, whatever. On the other side of it, right, on the quote unquote your favorite word, the Vedic side of it, it's we were joking about this earlier today in DMs, right? Like I've yet to find a major institution that's like oriented at all towards white people, like in the West. Like there are just Hindu temples, right, that serve like Indians in America or whatever. But in terms of like quote unquote like international institutions, they're all kind of scammy. And not just like the Indian ones, you know, like I don't want to single anyone out, but like it's pretty clear, like some of the ones I'm, you know, thinking of, right? Certain international societies of Dharma, maybe. I don't know, who can say. Um, and but they're very like they'll bring you into their proprietary kind of closed environment to teach you the stuff, you know, like they will very much onboard you and hold your hand and make you like one of the team, you know, in this way that's very like closed, right? Whereas like the Buddhist side of things is incredibly open, but it's very much like you got to find your own way, and you'll probably burn yourself out and just forget it, you know what I mean? It's like a really really interesting like clash of like institutional structure and sort of aims. And I'm wondering if that's, does that reflect any kind of like deeper like philosophical or sort of like metaphysical like reality layer, or is that just like contingent historical shit of how things have happened here in North America?
I think both. Great question, but I think both. But I also think, like, as you and I have been talking about for a few weeks, like Lomdre versus Lomrim. You know, the Gelugpa Dharma centers are they look like very well off, and it's very like that North Face yuppie crowd that loves Buddhism. Yay, Vajrayana. Okay, great. But they have they teach Lamrim, so they teach the graduated method. So it's very much like, oh, you're going to practice like 21 Tara. That's going to be like your practice. And then maybe one of the teachers or someone will decide, okay, you're ready to like receive like another empowerment. But obviously, it's like a little more decoherent now because of the way online empowerments work and like recordings on YouTube and teachings like that. And then teachers will say, okay, well, you can listen to the recording, and that is the empowerment in and of itself. So from a Lam Dre perspective, which is the sort of non-dual. That's the true non-dual teaching. Like Lamrim is not non-dual. And I think this is where even I went wrong, perhaps at the beginning of like doing the Grey Lodge spaces, was I was like, because I think more like that. It's not like it wasn't an ontological choice that I was like, I'm going to present non-duality and like force all these people to like really reconcile with it. It was more how I approach things, and like multiple people would say to me, like much higher level Buddhists, much higher level tantric practitioners would be like, you have a very non-dual view. And I would be like, do I? And so I was like, okay, well, this makes sense, because obviously that was always my orientation. So what I'm trying to say is that there are immense sectarian differences. And obviously you have things like the Rime movement, which is very much like, yes, texts are restricted. There are like reasons why they are. And like I agree with all those reasons, but I can't control their sort of dissemination on the internet. And so the reality is there has to be a kind of interface, to use one of your words, between like the text and the way it actually could be. I'm just saying speculatively could be understood. And I think I can do that in a way, or I think I have tried to at least maybe grasp at it, but I've tried to sort of speak on it. And I think sometimes I have been inflexible and perhaps even dogmatic, although I would obviously decry that. Even if you go listen to the spaces from 2 years ago, I would have said I'm like a very anti-dogmatic. But I think now I've come to more of a reconciliation of all of those paradoxes, and I can sort of relay things with more of a, I just, as you know, Solar, I say it's just ineffable, and all our conceptual bullshit is just bullshit. So, I think I can relay things in a more ease. I have more ease now. I'm not so fixated on like I have to relay it in this specific non-dual way. This is how everybody should understand it. Like I know that that's not even how Dharma works. Like the old joke is there's 108,000 Dharmakayas, Dharma minds, different kinds of Dharma practice for different people. But then then it becomes 108 million, and then it becomes 108 billion. So there are really different dharma, like different kinds of teachings that are going to resonate with different people. And when I'm saying resonate, obviously it's not fully based in your own perception. It's actually based in what's closer to what I would call primordial truth. So yes, Eros, please go ahead.
I think it's kind of interesting when you're talking about, and maybe I misunderstood, so apologies if I did, but if you're talking about almost like Eastern, like the East being more, open, and in a way they do kind of, there's more of a focus, I think, on the feminine and on this idea of like, I don't know, chaos, you know, kind of going back to that primordial in a different way, I would say, than the West. And so it's more, a lot more freedom and walking your own path type of thing. But then in the West, you have Catholicism, and you have like these secret fraternities and stuff like that that are more structured and more closed. And it's just kind of an interesting dichotomy where it's like, it makes me think of like Jung and this passage from the Red Book, or this chapter from the Red Book, where he's talking about like this Western god, this giant, like tall, blinded kind of god of like ordered goodness, and he's walking towards the east. And then there's a minotaur who is walking west. And anyway, that chapter, I won't talk about it too much, but it just reminded me of that, and that kind of relationship between the East and West.
I'm going to let Solar go. Thank you, Eros. I just want to say one really quick thing, which I actually did write down. So one of the ways that Dharma sort of reconciles this, like Buddhist Dharma, is that it's an altruistic intention to bring people into the Dharma. Like it is an evangelical religion, if you want to call it that. Like to bring people, whether you consider a tantric way, like bring people into the Kalachakra wheel, the wheel of time, so we're all turning in the same direction, which is obviously, I would say, non-dual, but that's unsatisfactory. I understand. And so that's what the whole thing is like the degree of freedom now, especially in the way that it's disseminated, is because it is considered to be like it's considered to be karmically positive. Like it at least it plants the seed for future rebirths or future lifetimes, that you will come back and have like a stronger dharmic connection. So anyway, Solar, please go ahead. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, like I'm pretty sure I was brought onto the path in a past life by, Bodhisattva Hitler or something like that. It's all skillful means, right? No, but what I was gonna say is specifically to Eros's comment is that there isn't this like separation, right? When we're talking about the feminine, which is often associated with like the sort of like void aspect, the primordial sort of like matrix, the material matrix of sort of creation or of the universe, this passive aspect, right? In Dharma, that's inseparable from the thing, right? Like it's like the empty nature of mind is the Dharmakaya nature. That isn't something that's been sort of like parsed out and put over there in the scary other sort of category of night, space, dark, spooky other, right? It's funny, Jen and I were talking about this too, because I had done a bunch of prep getting ready for a guest who is the episode should be dropping fairly soon. No pressure or anything. But in getting ready for that, I was going back to going through my Persian, my ancient Aryan, Iranian sort of religious sources, right? And one of the more interesting notes is that originally Mithras was not split from his mother consort, right? So the original figure of Mithras included, as in a very sort of like dharmic way. I'm just giving this as an example, right? It was this androgynous figure that contained both the sort of solar, luminous, affirmative masculine principle, as well as the sort of feminine empty nature, right? And then later, as that cult developed, as many cults developed, they sort of parsed out that feminine figure from the masculine principle. And then you can say, as things degenerate over time, these sort of lunar feminine, like worship of the great mother cult sort of tends to take precedence in the southern races. Sorry, I'm reading Evola, right? So I can get kind of into the flow of that. You don't have to take that sort of interpretive lens on it, right? But the point is that originally these things were not, and probably shouldn't be, separated from one another, because the nature of mind is both luminous and empty. And that's something that gets, just to put a bow on this, sort of reaches its sort of distortive zenith in the Abrahamic religions, right? And in sort of attempting to banish that, at least on the surface, at least the sort of normie exoteric version of this, to sort of posit that that sort of empty the chaos onto which order must be kind of projected in this sort of like external dominating way as being like inherently sort of moralistically evil or something like that, which is sort of absurd, right, from an ontological perspective. But it's unfortunate, but we're dharmics here, so.
Well, I'm so happy to hear you say that. Like, we're Dharmics. That makes me feel happy. I know you are, but I know you love your experimentations with other things. So we won't go there. We won't go there into that right now. But no, that was great. That was really great. I agree with that. The thing is like, I know I posted the DCS quote about, and he was talking about this exact thing, which he's obviously drawing somewhat from Tantra. I mean, let's be honest, he is. And so, not every mandala has to have a mother consort. It's kind of interesting, actually. So that is kind of like the whole thing for Aeon of the Daughter, actually, and I'm sure Solar actually knows that is that, like, I'm positing like sort of something else, something like a secret fifth thing, but that is not. I'm not. I didn't come up with that. That is actually in tantra, certain tantras, and it makes sense. It's like, it doesn't always have to be the father. It doesn't always have to be the mother, and it can actually be the son and the daughter. And what does that mean? Well, there's different ways to interpret that. So I'm just saying is that this is also a very dharmic way to think, right? Like, the primordial consort becomes the barbello, becomes the grandmother goddess who falls. You could say she's falling through the pleroma, excuse me. She falls all the way down. Her corpse becomes the sort of world, like the nuit, the space, but we're trapped inside the corpse, or we're on top of her corpse. Tantra will explain it both ways, actually. And so her corpse composes like this reality of material, but there's still luminousness and masslessness inside. And so that is what actually gives rise to the dakinis. Not all the dakinis are enlightened, meaning they don't all know who they are, or they don't all have a name, but there are certain ones who have cultivated, and this is an interesting thing about the definition of tantras. Sometimes the dakinis themselves will actually approach Buddhist mahasiddhas or lamas, or just practitioners on the carnal ground, just sorcerers on the carnal ground, and they will have a discourse with those people, and they will actually take refuge in Dharma. And people will be like, okay, this is like Buddhist cope, because they're saying this Hindu deity that's like extremely wrathful, that's like human sacrifice and like all that shit. And it's really not, though, because if you understand like the way the texts work and how discursive they are and what is actually being said beyond the sort of superficial layer, you can understand like the dakini is actually like, the dakini is the one who controls the conversation. Even if she's asking the practitioner or the lama or whomever it is, if she's asking him questions on the nature of reality, she's also challenging him, because she is actually non-dual, is how we would consider it. So it's bringing the space of Hokmah into the sort of like time of Binah. It's giving it like stricture, but also like you're containing wisdom in knowledge. That's basically what it is. So yeah, I think and also Taoism, we've talked about this, Eros, and also Solar, is the idea of like Taoism is very pro chaos, primordial grandmother. They even call it that. They say she arises like the way arises from the swamp. It gives a very Gnostic kind of very identical sort of idea. She's arising from this primordial swamp of chaos. She is chaos, but she's also something else. And then also talking about like this idea of the goddesses having conceptual states of understanding. It's so important to recognize that like Tantra itself posits a way to interact with these supernatural forces through ritual subjugation. So one of the who is considered the Tantric Buddha, his name is Guru Padmasambhava or Guru Rinpoche. He is the Tantric Buddha. Like he is the resolution of the three body problem for Tantra. If you're especially for some kinds of Tantra, some schools will say. But he subjugates all of these figures basically using tantric ritual methodology. And he says, and he makes the deities swear like vows to Dharma, not to him, to Dharma. And he says, like, you must uphold Dharma in the world, which is like to recognize your own Buddha nature or your own Bodhisattva nature. So the goddesses from Indian Tantra can actually rise in consciousness to become a Buddha. That's very ontological. It's very Buddhist, right? Like very Dharmic. They can traverse the carnal ground, climb the tree, as I've often said, and they can attain in their sort of realization of who they actually are. Yes, Solar, please go ahead.
So I'm going to ask this to one of our guests soon, but I want to ask you now, right? A little preview for me. So for an entity like these deities that we're talking about, right? That we might say, if you'll permit me, these things exist acausally, right? And so in a certain sense, they sort of exist in a non-manifest, not just space, quote unquote, but time, quote unquote. They sort of exist outside the time of manifestation until they are presenced by a variety of means. However, we think that happens. It can probably happen a lot of different kind of ways, right? But they can be invoked ritually, for example, right? Is it possible once an entity has been subjugated, like you were just kind of outlining, right? Is it possible that a practitioner who is either ignorant that this has happened or for whatever reason is not seeking to engage with the sort of Vajra version of that deity, can the sort of pre-subjugated version, if you want to say that, of the god be invoked and ritually manipulated? Like, because I think there's a really weird thing happening where we sort of exist, or at least we sort of think of things in terms of this linear causal time, right? So, A happens, then B, then C, then D, right? But when we're dealing with entities that sort of exist inherently outside of time, I don't necessarily think it's that obvious. And yeah, so I'm wondering, like, could you still have recourse to the sort of like unsubjugated form, or is it something else that would perhaps answer that call, wear the skin suit, etc.?
Well, I think you kind of know where I'm going to go with this. Is I think that with the latter part of what you said, like I think it's something else. I also kind of, it's not that I agree with the Taoist model of like the heavens being a bureaucracy, but there is kind of an interesting idea that different spirits can fulfill different like the same role, but at different times in like the more higher cosmic, like you could say Deva time, because their time is different, right? Heavenly time is different than our time, our understanding and relationship to time. There are like multiple layers of time, right? Like there are 9 time kings, Kala Bhairava. He splits himself into 8 forms, so the 9th divides himself into the 8, who do 8 kinds of dances, very Gurdjieffian. We've talked about this, I think. And he does like 8 dances around the cosmos. So 5 of his dances are the 5 elements of Tantra. So fire, earth, air, water, and Akasha, which I don't personally translate to void. I like space. But this is this is a contentious issue. So we'll just say it can be translated as void or space, but I prefer space. And then he also becomes the sun and the moon. So that's 7. And then he becomes death That's 8. Oh, that in time. So that's 9. So there you go. So so he becomes all those manifesting forces. That is time. So there are different kinds of time, is what I'm saying. And so the deities all have a different relationship with time. This is a much more tantric, sort of like Indian tantric way, but all of these things are reoccurrent in Buddhism, like in Buddhist tantra. So you have these like kind of complicated, I'd say it's much more complicated relationship with time, different layers. And maybe that's part of what karma is the recognition of relationships, as I've posited many times on this show, and also like on episodes I've been on other people's shows, and on obviously on Saints, is that the relational ontology between things, that is actually what karma is. But it's in perception, it's in recognition that there's like karmic connections between like yourself, the place you live, the grounds you live on. If you want to recognize karmic connections with other people, if you, I'm not saying sense them or whatever. I'm just saying if there are, if those things exist, what they exist in is in perception. So like we have to forge those treaty relationships, like you brought up Mithras. That's great, because like I'm very fond of the Maritzi goddess, obviously, and that's the Buddhist counterpart to the Mithraic form, who obviously in Japan, you and I discuss this extensively, who in Japan is actually usually is a male deity. He's usually considered a wisdom king. But in Chinese esoteric Buddhism, Tongni, it's almost always the same as the Tibetan form, which is a young girl, 13-year-old girl. So it's definitely interesting. There's definitely like a idea that she wields the karma of the stars and the planets. She is a Mahavijja, by the way. She is a Grahamatrika Mahavijja, meaning she is the greater wisdom of the planets and the stars. She's not included ever in the 10 the grouping of 10 goddesses from Nepal, because she's the hidden child. She's pre-generative, and you can see her practices in Nepal preserved under the guise of Kumari. But Kumari can also take other forms in Tantra. She becomes a 16-year-old girl who becomes the consort to the sun. She can become, like there are various different things. But the Kumari is like a pre-generative child. That's how we would think of it. So there is like a quality of like the divine androgyne in it, but it's always, for Tantra, it's always understood to be like a feminine force. But interestingly, like Maritzi, is her consort can be said to be Rahu, but they can also be said to have a sibling relationship. So it can be either or. It again is very text dependent. And some of those, like when they say like this is the feminine counterpart to the masculine deity or the Yab Yum consort, it doesn't necessarily mean it at a sexual layer. Like this is really important, I think, for people also to hear, like in relation to Tantra. It can mean that. It can. I'm not being I'm not doing like aversion or anything. I'm saying it can. But there are multiple layers of understanding, and there are multiple layers of meaning. So you have to be able to like parse the layers and understand like what part of the density do I want to practice, what part is realistic. Like we had all those spaces on We Was Kangs. Obviously, I even called them like shaman kangs and all that stuff. Thanks, Joshua. I appreciate that. But it's not about like reconstructing like the primordial like goddess cult. For me, like that's not my project. My project is just more like penetrating the understanding of the text and the practices, and like recognizing that we're in 2026. We live on the Turtle Island. Like what do we do with these like things and the Dharmic ideas that we have now? Okay, I went on for a long time. Sorry about that. Eros, please go ahead.
I was just gonna say, even outside of causality, you could probably just still extend your will to the god.
I mean, it is an interesting idea. Like, what is a god? What happens when they're subjugated? Is the subjugation real, quote unquote? Is it just a mythology? Is it just like a way to bring like those? Because there is a way in Tantra to understand like the gods, especially like Vedic gods. Vedic gods in a tantric context, a Buddhist tantric context, are actually related to the 5 elements, the 5 aggregated elements. So they're pre-disaggregation. They're clarified. They're still klapothic. The Vedic gods, like Brahma, Indra, all those people. So so when you see the Buddhist deities on top of them, it's because the Buddhist deity is actually disaggregating them and subjugating them. But it's not just ritual subjugation, it's also like what they mean. Yes, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, I've always conceptualized, and again, I'm not a tantric, so I don't actually have to worry about this really. But I've always conceptualized the deities as like using common metaphor of the mind as this sort of like infinitely faceted gem, right? And a particular deity is sort of that. If you shine a light through at a particular angle of that gem, right? Like the sort of like refraction pattern, the resplendent display that is going to appear to you is going to be different than if you move the light a little bit over, right? And shown it on different facets, right? That doesn't mean that it's of a different nature, right? All of these, the nature of all these deities is going to be the same, one with the nature of mind, et cetera, right? But it's like you're choosing to sort of crystallize like different attributes or different aspects, right, of that primordial nature, which is your nature of mind. And so as such, for me, it's like it doesn't asking the question of like, is this a mythology or something? It doesn't really, that's not really coherent, right? Because like, at least from my own perspective, which is like retarded Dzogchen guy's perspective, right? Like essentially, if you're like interfacing with a deity and that deity is appearing to you as a sort of like perfected form, right? Something that's been brought into at least some kind of mandala, it's been subjugated, right? Like that is, I mean, in a really obvious way, like that is you understanding at least how the original sort of impure, poisoned, whatever, the sort of like original form of that deity, the contingent form of that deity can be sort of like brought onto the path. It can be rectified, like, and you are literally like seeing that sort of like rectified version of it. Right. It's sort of like the wisdom of your mind that is doing that purification process, right? Has enacted that transformation. Now, asking whether that's happening, quote unquote, out there or quote unquote in here, just is sort of again, sort of from my perspective, it's sort of meaningless, I guess. Not hating. I'm just like, that's like, to me, that was never the sort of thing that I was worrying about. I'm interested in talking about it in those terms, right? But in terms of my own practice, it just doesn't really accord, you know?
I feel that. I think from a tantric perspective is that you're not a passive agent for the deity arising, because the deity is the mantra. So you're speaking the mantra / the deity into existence, but it might already exist. But you might just be, as I said to Eros, like you might just be tapping in to that frequency of luminosity. And you know what? If you go look at a Vajrayogini mandala right now, like everybody can Google it, Vajrayogini mandala, you will see there is a hexagram, and it's showing her descending into the like a cube, like a red cube that transforms into a hexagram. And then she takes the resplendent form of 64, and then that is all of her activity forms in all the different colors. So I completely understand the, I respect the sort of thing, but it's also like, if I can go practice like a deity that I have, I can go reconstruct a ritual from like a non-tantric thing and like try and invoke the deity. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what I'm going to get, right? So that's where I would perhaps differ, is that I would say that it's really dependent on the primordial word, and then that is the reflection of your own mind. The bija is like the word that also self-arise, like it is also arising in your mind. So for me, I would say that we're very, and that also goes to the question of like Dharma centers. Like, yes, there is like a quote unquote libertarian element in a big way to Vajrayana, and this is in many ways a reflection of its origins as not Vajrayana, but as Mantrayana, which is when Guru Padmasambhava and all the Indian Mahasiddhas and all the Mahasiddhas until Tsongkhapa, so not even until the 17th century. That's really when Vajrayana became Vajrayana. Like Mantrayana was the name, because it really is so dependent on the spoken words. Like, what words are you speaking? In what order do they occur? What order do they appear? And a really skilled tantric will actually understand ways to reconfigure the words And I'm not talking about necessarily you have to practice that mantra to understand how to reconfigure the words. Someone who is able to just have accomplishment in one mantra can then look at another mantra, not always the case, but sometimes can look at a different mantra and understand just minor resolutions to issues in that mantra, clarification of the word. There's also a thing called Dakini language. Like you and I have spoken about this like last year, I think. So you may not even remember. But like the Dakini language is a particular form of written Tibetan. And then the candle is like the candle is flickering. So there's a shadow on the specific form of written Tibetan. And so then that gets etched as its own ritual language. But it actually can't be read. There's no like syllabary or whatever. There's no like dictionary for it. It can only be read by people who quote unquote do Vajrayogini practices or just any yogini practice. So there, you know, I would say that it's, for me, you know, this Solar, it's like it's very dialogical, and all the exterior appearances are just the hosts. So I agree the hosts exist. Like the hosts definitely exist. But even in Indian Tantra, like if you go listen to Rajarshi Nandi and his channel, and he's been talking about this since 2017. He wrote the book Adaltmika, very good book. Everybody can read it. It's all about Tantra. And it is basically, he lays it out like you will be doing like Bhairava sadhana for 2 years, and then maybe like this like a present, something will presence itself. He even says, like, as an Indian tantric, like, it's a very high, I would recognize him as a very highly realized Indian tantric. Not even realize, like, just like he understands what the system is. Like, he's deep in. He says that you should not ever worship the host. You know, Tantra also agrees with this. Yes, of course, like I will joke on the time, not joke, but I will like talk about like Yakshini things or like subjugation, like Indonesian magic or like Thai folk magic. That is not that's not Tantra per se. There might be Yakshini practices and all this like Pisahachi subjugation and to win the lottery and all that bullshit. That's not that, you know, that's not really the point. It's if you're doing like a enlighten the whole. So for me, I think you know the Solar too, is I'm very focused on the quote unquote enlightened deities. Even for protectors, I personally do enlightened protectors only. I do not engage with worldly spirits or gods or any of those things. Enlightened protectors only, enlightened deities only for me. This is just for me. I'm not making a prognostication for anyone or saying what anyone should do. Okay, I'm just saying for me. So it's a hard question in some ways because of how I sort of practice myself and then also understand. Okay, sorry about that. Eros had her hand up first, but if Solar is quick, he can go.
Yeah, I just wanted to say like real quick, if the whole like, oh, I have the hard line about like not working with unenlightened deities or protector deities or anything else like lower down on the sort of ladder. Uh, that's a really obvious idea. Or like if you've had experiences with things like that, it will be immediately clear why you probably don't want to fuck with that. I don't know, like that's just like it sounds like a fuddy duddy thing, right? It sounds like, oh, dude, this guy's like, he's lame. He's like putting rules on me. I don't want any rules. I'm a cool chaos magician. But yeah, I mean, just like if you go looking a little bit, and you have some of those really interesting experiences, right? But I don't know. You'll probably get a vibe. Just saying.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You know, it's not, but I don't fuck with like angel. I'm saying it for both. I don't fuck with like angels. Like to me, angels, quote unquote demons, those things are the same for me. They're the hosts. Push them aside, push them off the chessboard. I don't fuck with either of them. I just don't. That's just me. Again, it's just me. Yeah, Solar's right. It might be a little grandpa, but actually, I know that it can be more transformative to focus on the enlightened deities. And that does not mean less sorcery. I think this is a common misconception that worldly deities do more activity. No, like this is why, like in my perception, Evola would always kind of be, he would always kind of complain about Buddhist Tantra because it's harder to access. But it kind of also lays the groundwork to get there, but it doesn't necessarily give the immediacy of getting there. But once you're able to get there at least once or twice, you'll start to recognize like there are certain ways to do it. And like as you said, Solar, like mantra, not mantra, yeah, but also mantra. Tantra is really about it really is about praxis. Like it is about rote practice. It's about choosing one deity and accomplishing it and doing it like every day. Like I spend 2 to 3 hours a day in sadhana. I'm not exaggerating. Like since Christmas, like Solar knows this. Like I did not have a great experience over last year. We'll just say the whole year. So I have been really focused on my own sadhana. And Solar, obviously, he is an inspiration and my rival in a way because he'll be like, oh, I'm doing this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And then I feel like, yeah, I have to fucking like step up my game. I have to make sure like I'm like, Diamond Thunder so I can answer his like very precise questions. Anyways, I'm sorry. Eros, please go ahead.
I was just gonna say too, when you're talking about gods, you could extend it even further. Like you could think of it as, I guess like the Platonic way to think of it would be like everything kind of unfolds linearly. I know I've talked about this with you before, Jane, but and almost like there's this scheme of like I'm trying to think of the word that I want to use. I mean, multiplicity that like and differentiation, and in a way you could almost imagine that consciousness probably unfolded like that too. And so, we're pretty complex consciousnesses, but you could probably think of gods as like a more defined, less differentiated, less broad consciousness, and or even as like as a principle that is like well defined and it has its identifiers. And then some would even say like iamblichus, that directly kind of interacting with like an object that is related to a god is directly interacting with the god itself. It's also the one that would talk about extending your will to the gods, and because like in a way, since they are so defined, they don't have that free will that we have in the same way. They're more mechanical, they have more boundaries, and so us extending our will to them is probably pretty impactful on causality. And I mean also like you could make an argument on why you would interact with maybe a negative deity, like maybe if you were like super supervised and you were trying to destroy your psyche to rebuild it or something. But yeah.
Okay, so you said, I mean, everything you said was really interesting. That was great. Thank you, Eros. But I did write down something because of what you said. Gods are bound by heavy, heavy karma. This is a Buddhist thinking. I know that people get mad at me for saying this. This is truly, I promise you, go read Pranaparamita Sutras, go read Tantras. Yes, this is true. The gods are bound by heavy, heavy karma. To be reborn a god is not inherently a better rebirth. Yes, there are elements. Okay, so if you aspire to like quote unquote live forever, but gods don't live forever. Not in Buddhism. Maybe in other religions, but not in Buddhism. Especially not in Tantra. Okay? So you don't get mad at me. I don't want any angry DMs, no pagans, please. You're perfectly valid. You just believe you're valid, that's fine. You don't need my approval. But so yeah, definitely in Tantra, like the gods don't live forever, but they live a very long time. time moves very, very slowly for them. So they can like live out great extended lives. They have perfect health. They have magical powers. Every moment of their existence is heavily weighted against them. Every time that they interfere on the human world, it's heavily weighted against them. They answer a prayer, heavily weighted against them. Now, of course, deities can function in a karmic way or a dharmic way, meaning that they can help alleviate certain karmas from our lives, but they can also alleviate. They can be act in a dharmic way if they are actually emanation of an enlightened being. Now, this is complicated. This is more of a Pure Land thing, but certain times worldly deities will appear to people to sort of explain to them, like, this is actually how, like I was explaining about the dakinis, a very similar thing. A worldly god, so something that has appearance existence of something very wrathful, can appear to people to actually explain the true nature of reality. So I love to use this example of Longchenpa, like a great tantric master. His personal protector was who? Za, Rahula, space, the great dragon king of the eclipse, which we so famously spar about all the time, solar. So Rahu Ketu. But in Buddhism, he's one deity, right? He is the planetary, the daemonic, so the shadow. He is the composite form of all the demons of of stars and planets. He's the composite of them. So, but he also knows his own will, and he's also a 10th level Bhumi. But he's very ferocious. If you see the iconography, Longchenpa used to see him all the time, and they would have these long discourses. And Rahula would tell him to do things, build the monastery here. Go read this text. There's a terma buried under this rock. All these different things. So the deity was appearing to him in a very wrathful form, but sometimes he would appear as miniature. Really interesting. He would appear as like a little tiny Rahula, and he would like talk to him. And like, so are we to say it's not real? Well, I think it's real, but that's me, right? I also say, like, I don't know if space is real or not real. I leave it to be a very conceptual or alchemical sort of thing. Solar is a not space is fake person, right? So I think that's fair, right? Like, everybody's going to have their own perception and conceptualization of the greater cosmos. Like, I'm not saying that gods aren't real. I just personally don't take refuge in them. I take refuge in like the enlightened forces, which are like the Buddha, Deva, Dakini. The Dharmapala is the fourth secret pillar, but it's actually it's not. It's the point, but not the point. Yes, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say a couple of things. Sort of to what Eros said. For me, one of the so she mentioned very astutely, right, that the gods are sort of constrained by their natures, particularly in the Platonic system. But you sort of see this. You see this in the Egyptian system too, right? Like, Ma'at as a goddess of justice, like, is sort of like literally like defined. She is that principle, right? And so you can presence that principle. For instance, when you have, one of the wandering, I forget what those guys were called in Egypt, the judges, basically, like the wandering sort of priests of Ma'at, who would essentially hear court cases, right? Like, they would literally presence the deity when they sort of decided what was just and unjust, etc., right? um as a practitioner, I'm explicitly trying to go beyond any constraint. Like, that's the entire point, right? I am trying to escape from all contingency, to go beyond all contingency, right? To essentially pursue the unconditioned state, which means blowing past all of that, right? Like, that's um into sort of like more subtle degrees beyond manifestation and non-manifestation, beyond being and non-being, right? That to me is like the core promise of Buddha Dharma, right? And he says as much, right? He's like, yeah, we're going higher than that, right? Like, I am above the gods, I am beyond the gods. Also, I'm beyond the four extremes. This is completely ineffable. It can't be described, but that's where we're going. I know how to get there, and I want to take you with me, right? And so for me, that's like a sort of like core part of my orientation, my spiritual orientation. That's how I define initiation, is sort of like ascending. I'm a little bit more familiar with the kind of like traditional sort of conception of it, right? Which is that, like, um, I sort of like, I recognize the sort of this sort of chain of manifestations, right? This sort of like hierarchy of being. But I'm not as comfortable putting these sort of like affirmative, distinct, discrete, and self-stable conceptual labels on things: good, truth, beauty, etc. I think that's like one of the core divergences of East and West, right? Even though obviously they all come from the sort of Aryan root, right? They're all expressions of Aryan philosophy in that sense. But yeah, that's one of like the sort of like fundamental differences, and particularly the sort of like the core promise of Buddha Dharma there. And yeah, just finally, I say it all the time, but I'm also just at a practical level very fond of thinking of like using that model, right, of sort of gods as sort of the sort of points of origin of certain principles, certain ideas that then resonate through the cosmos in perception, right? Thinking of those things in terms of like I know no one listens to the radio anymore, right? But they're signal transceivers, right? Like we can tune ourselves, we can sort of modulate our consciousness to pick up in greater or lesser measure these stations, these frequencies, right? Like we can essentially like shape our world, shape our perception of the world by being intentional and mindful and acting with discretion on sort of like what we choose to sort of acknowledge, to see, what we choose as sort of this sort of foundational principles of our reality, like in a really really just like practical pragmatic way. I'm not even necessarily saying you have to commit to some ontology, but just like being being mindful about like how you're constructing your world and your worldview, and what you're choosing to recognize in yourself and other people. Like if you do that, that's like the most important sort of like magical exercise you can possibly do if you're going to do one thing. Is just taking control of your own perception and reality construction.
Okay, sorry, Eros. I have to respond. Just three quick things. First of all, Aeon of Mod Space. So you're in trouble. I'm mad. Um, Theravod. I'm kidding, obviously. But it is an Aeon of Mod Space. It really is. So you know this, anyways. But I think I think there are certain principles that are beyond that, on beyond like the quote unquote like deity presencing. But I know this is like a longer part of our conversation about like Dzogchen versus V Tantra. If there is such a thing, I would say there isn't. Obviously, Rime says that they're all equivalent. So to me, they're equivalent. So that's how I'd understand it. But I understand what you're saying. I wrote a true Theravadin plus threat Zenbro at heart, so take that as you will. And relative beauty. Maya is not the enemy, as I told you. It really isn't. Things can be very beautiful in Maya. That is perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine to acknowledge. It doesn't go against, Dharma. Just we have to understand their nature to be ephemeral. That's the idea. That's why it's like non-grasping, because you're not going to like intentionally cause yourself suffering, but sometimes we do. Sometimes we do implicate ourselves in the world and in karma and in, even if it's perceptual. That's okay. I mean, this is a very different. Like, obviously, I have like a more Rime, more like, it's a little more freeform approach. I understand that, but I think it's okay to like say, yeah, things can exist as beautiful as like they might not be absolute, but they can exist, and we can say with a relative degree of certainty that they exist. I think that's very fair. For me, I would say that. Okay, sorry, Eros, please go ahead.
I'm just wondering, like, what does that really look like for you? Because, to me, it's like, yeah, we have free will, so we can choose anything that we want, and we might have to fight against, the overall forces to kind of do whatever we want. But, it's like, there's a certain extent where it's like, because personally, like, I've been obsessed with like the concepts of fate and necessity and the daemon and anarchy, and it's like anarchy and Saturn really go together, and I don't know how much we can really get around the matter of necessity and of these definitions of ourselves, because for us to even exist, we had to have been defined. And, then you get into the matter of the Ka, And it's like, does that mean that you're rejecting your Ka? And, so I just wonder, because, like, we might think more similarly than you think.
Go ahead, Solar.
And so I'm going to have to dip off here pretty quick. So one, I would love to get into this with you in more depth when we have our little conversation, which I'm greatly looking forward to. And also, this is where I become incomprehensible because I am simultaneously a left-hand path guy who works with this elaborate sort of like soul complex model that I kind of do that over here. I'm gesturing with my left hand appropriately, right? But at the end of the day, I'm like hours every day, like Dzogchen guy, right? And those answers are going to look very different, at least on the surface, right? Whether we can bring those conceptions together, I think there's a lot of juice to be squeezed there, but that's like a much longer conversation. So I'm gonna dip out with the Dzogchen answer, which is that like I don't exist. I mean, like full stop, right? Like my awareness. So there's a guy, there's Solar Exile that contingently is like walking around, eating food, talking on Twitter or whatever, right? But that's a sort of like convenient conceptual designation, right? That sort of like points to maybe some molecules and some ideas at a given point in time. It arises, it dissipates. It's inherently empty. My awareness is not I say my, like I am that, but that thing is like luminous and empty, and it does have its sort of own intuitive like genius, but that is not a conceptual discursive genius, right? It's beyond all of that, right? And when we say like it's beyond, I said the four extremes, which is beyond existence, beyond non-existence, beyond both existing and non-existing, neither existing, non-existing, right? Is the classical like four-way sort of Indian philosophical way to say that, right? And so, yeah, at a certain point, like since it insists on going beyond all that, it's like, well, then what the hell are you talking about? And I would say, yep, that's exactly the point, right? Like the first Dzogchen Samaya is, and this is going to be fairly constant across, in some form across all Buddha Dharma, is ineffability, which is really, really unsatisfying when you're trying to have a conversation on the internet and explain this to people. And it's like, dude, you literally can't like talk about this. Not because you're not allowed, but there's no content. There's no content. There's no conceptual boundary that could possibly even define the surface, even an inch of the surface of what is being referenced, right? It blows any sort of sign out of the water, right? Signification is impossible. So I understand the frustration there, but yeah, we sort of take that as like a starting point, right? Um, that is again completely different when we start talking about calling balls and strikes, bas and kas, so to speak. And I'd love to approach that question sort of from that angle, but in a different space. But hopefully coming up soon. And I look forward to that very much. Have a good night, guys.
Good night, Solar. Thanks. That was such an extreme answer, but anyways, I don't practice Dzogchen, so I don't speak for anyone else. I don't speak for Solar. He's allowed his own opinions and ideas. It's totally fine. For me, that was very extreme. I don't understand Dharma to be that way. I think reality is a multiverse. I think it's a lot weirder. I think that, I do think that I am real to a degree, relative degree. But I also think that there is a conceptual way to explain the universe. And I think Solar gave it multiple times, as did as I did with Eros on her channel. Cut a block of ice and hold it up to a clear blue sky. Or watch a lightning strike. Happens in perception. The acknowledgement of God is not the lightning strike itself. It's non-phenomenological, but it is real, and you are the witness to perceiving it. So that's what God is. That's what ineffable is. How can you really describe that? You're perceiving something that is so beyond you. like a lightning strike. Like we can't. Well, who knows what if we produce them or not? But if we can, but regardless of that, it is much greater than ourselves. So we are in perception of those things happening, and it's in the great space, right? Like this is the thing. Yeah, Tantra is weird. It's for magic. It's for magic in your mind. But it can also be very practical. Look at that. Look at Diamond Thunder. That's all it means. A lightning strike. That's all Diamond Thunder means. A lightning strike. It doesn't have to. I know I go really heavy Kabbalah, everybody. For the last 2 years, I know I really pushed it all on you. I pushed you all into like non-dual Dharma. That was not really my intention. It was more I was just explaining how I think of the world. So but I don't how I consider even the way that Solar described like the four pillars or whatever. To me, that's all extreme. Like to say like something can't be this or that. I don't like. I personally no. That's not remake. That I'll just tell you right now. That's not how I look at Dharma. It's not this or that. It's just like that's bullshit too. That's conceptual thinking. So if you want to say conceptual thinking is bullshit, then you have to say that is also bullshit. And so I would also say that it's really important to be led by bodhicitta, which is, I would argue, both Gevuratic and Hasidic at the same time. So that in synthesis, I think a lot of translators and scholars would agree. And I don't think that that's saying anything crazy. That you have discernment, discriminating awareness, and infinite loving kindness. Both. So, it doesn't mean do it as thou will because you're going to get scolded by the sky gods. It means do as thou will in order to like raise yourself up the tree, if you want to use that metaphor, or up the path, up the marga. But it's not do as thou will, as in like not recognizing karmic connections. Yes, those are real. You can say it's ephemeral. You can say it's not. That is Buddhist metaphysical shit. That's not really real world. Real world is that you acknowledge it, you either pursue it or you don't. You either reconcile it, rectify it, or something else. You make causal choices in the world with people, with every word you say, and maybe even with every word you think. Maybe with every word you post. It's a very dharmic way to think about it, a very tantric way to think about it. We've always said, the internet is the aether wave. This is the Black Library. Like what you post here, you might not think it has resonance, but it does have resonance somewhere. Our black cube devices, right? We don't even need a Teflon cord. We just like hold on to it every moment. That's the truth. So, I do think that it's real and not real, and I'm comfortable with that. And I do think people exist. To what degree is that existence predicated on aggregation? Well, I guess that depends on you. Are you cultivating yourself? And I'm not saying this from a place of like Clydesdale, like my giant white horse. I'm not that person. I've done lots of fuck ups. Trust me, with magic, with people. So I'm just that's where I'm coming from. Yes, I'm also left hand path, but I'm not the same. So I never meant to have a disagreement about like the Ka and the Ba and the Egyptian soul complex. I was trying to relay it in the Buddhist metaphysics that I thought would be most understandable. But I realized like to a Western audience that sometimes can be very extreme. Like to say that you are quote unquote nothing. No, I don't actually, that's not what I mean. And then that's sort of the problem. It's like, how can you say what you mean? So I started saying that emptiness, which is the Sunyata doctrine. So obviously I'm more of a Vajrayana practitioner. So I'm more affiliated with Pranaparamita. But I'm also like, a lot of the sutras are radical compassion doctrines. So they're not actually emptiness doctrines. What I'm saying is there's lots of different kinds of Dharma. There's lots of different kinds of focuses. But what the sort of the roots of Dharma You could say there are three. That's what I was trying to say about the Buddha Deva Dakini Dharmapala, is that you could say those are the representative of the four roots of Tantra, or the four roots of Dharma just in general. But it's not the fourth. The Dharmapala, the protector, doesn't actually form a square. It actually forms a triangle. That's the idea. So the Dharmapala himself is not the point, but it is actually like, it's just to lay the groundwork for what you're actually going to be doing. So that is what you're asking me. What am I talking about, Dharmapala? That's worldly gods, but they're not always worldly. There are enlightened deities that can also do that same function. So that's what I said when I don't work with like hosts or like either angels or demons. Like I don't fuck with that. Like I don't do any Abrahamic magic in that way. I might like add an herb here and there. And I'm not even against it, because as you all know, I'm a big fan of Kabbalah. I mean, we used it lots tonight. But I recognize that it does exist in Dharma. Like I can just see it. I think other people can see it. I think other people have seen it for a long time. I don't think I'm special in any way. But I think that also goes along with the point of like, what are you? Are you special or not special? A lot of teachers would say, oh, you're not special. Like you have to tell yourself you're not special. But like, there's also a context of like axialism in Dharma, that Dharma can change and update with the language of the people that speak it, or the people that practice it. So we do speak a radically different language. Our language is different even than when I was a kid. We use many different words, and like all millennials can talk about this. Like the words that I use online are not my words usually. They are usually like Zoomer and Alpha words. So, there is something to be said about that. That you have to like understand Dharma to be like flexible, fluid, updating, like always in constant reformation, constant zimzum, if you want to use a really Kabbalistic word. That's how I think of it. I think that is the true hyperspace kingdom. Like you want to talk about Keter and what that is, and that pink light that I got told was Uranian or something. Whatever, I don't care. But I think that what it really means, like hyperspace kingdom, is like our actual day-to-day life choices, the words that we speak, the thoughts that we think, the things that we post. I know this is like a little woo, but it, like, think about it. The phone is Rahu, the dragon. The software is Ketu, the smoky tail. Just because you can't see the smoky tail doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's part of existence appearance too. It appears as an app, but is that really what it is? What if we're doing like actual magic? Magic is motherfucking real. I've always said this for the Grey Lodge. Every single space. Well, maybe not every single one, but most of them, right? So I think the whole point is that magic is motherfucking real. We come together in synthesis. We come together in consent. And, we did the Aeon of Mott working. Like, that is the truth. Like, the Aeon of the Daughter, the Aeon of Mott. Like, yeah, it's an Egyptian god. And like Solar said, he has that paradox between like left-hand path versus Egyptian, or versus Dzogchen. Dzogchen is very extreme, in my opinion. And this is not a reflection of Solar, but this is a reflection of like, I've met many Western Dzogchen people. It goes very extreme. So it's like, it's like for people that just cannot, that's why I like mantra recitation. I think people should just do mantra recitation. I think that's perfect for right now. I think you just turn off your phone for an hour and you go like recite mantra. You want to know the truth of Tantra? That's the truth of Tantra. And you know how I know that? Because it says it in every Tantra, every single one, from highest to lowest. The root essence of all Tantra is the mantra. It's literally what it says. Every single one. So learning to recite the words, to actualize, and then learning when you finish, like when you're capable of reciting the words without referencing any book or anything, you can just do it and powerfully presence the words. Talking about presencing the deity, presence the words first. Each syllable should be presenced. That's how to really correctly do a mantra. You presence every single syllable and this also happens in your mind. You start to imagine the Sanskrit and the syllables appearing before you in specific flashing colors, just like Kabbalah. Very interesting, right? But the focus is not on the Sephira. The focus is actually on the self-arising word. But the word is also spoken by you. So the word also arises in you. That means reality is also part of you. But who are you? That's more a Dharmic way, I think, to think, or Tantric. That's a very Tantric way to sort of look at that. Like, who do you want to be? Who are you now? And where do you want to go? And maybe we don't know. And Tantra, especially in the Buddhist way, is to figure that stuff out. That's really what Tantra is. It's path working every day, trying to recognize, yes, you can dress it up and say, oh, okay, I'm looking for Buddha nature in everyone, in every single moment, everything. It's not really that. It's my mind is a carnal ground. I've said this 10 million times. You can go listen to all the Aeon of the Daughter things. I say this every single time. My mind is a carnal ground. That's why we need the wrathful practices. That's why I do the wrathful deities. That is 100% as true today as it was 2 years ago. So the reality is I use the practices to path work every day. That is what I've always told all of you to do. Recite mantra. If you want to practice like Christian Kabbalah, that is perfectly fine. I have no problem with that, and I've never had a problem with that. The only thing I don't really like is Islam, which I've said many times. This is maybe for personal reasons or for cultural reasons, maybe both. But I never really liked it. So it's not the system for me. But that being said, there is Sufi Kabbalah. We've talked about it on the spaces many times. Al-Bayani Kabbalah. It's not my preference either. I like Tantra. I like 10 directions. I think that's what it all comes down to. You want to talk about, like, bring it back to like something that Eros would be able to speak more on, like the Platonic and Neoplatonic numbering systems. Tantra posits 10. 10 is the primordial number. It's the 1 and the 0 together. The circumpunct. You can also say that. It's not untrue. The feminine divine consort is the 0, but she's not nothing. She is luminous and massless, but this can also be understood as composite elements: air, earth, fire, water, and space. Happening in perception, which is the 1, which is also interestingly the sun. Yes, you heard me right. The sun, who is also you, especially if you are the male deity. This does not mean that women cannot practice the same deities. Of course they can. Historically, they always did. It's just that a lot less women practice Tantra. And you'll think, oh, well, then how can you have sex cults? Well, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about Karma Mudra at all. I'm talking specifically about doing the sadhana practices. Okay? Which primarily and should take place within your own mind, which is also where the primordial ground is. So we can locate it. So we can say it is this or that. And we can say the nature of it. And also, reality is made of light. Maya is never your enemy. The way things appear in appearance existence, that is not your enemy. What your enemy is your perception. But that's not necessarily your enemy. Your perception of things does matter. How much of that are you putting onto a situation? How much of that are you understanding the situation to have specific meaning that you are assigning it, but it actually doesn't maybe have that meaning? That's what it is. That's where Maya deceives us. But Maya is not the enemy. Mara is the enemy. Delusion is the enemy. Thinking things should be like something else because you want them to be, that is Mara. Saying that I can change this circumstance in my life, there's nothing wrong with that. That is going in accordance with Dharma. You are saying, like, I'm going to change this circumstance in my life by ridding myself of negative emotions. That's the whole point of practicing Dharma. You're ridding yourself of negative emotions. You're on the positionless path. You cannot be left-hand path and right-hand. This is just my opinion, but I'm not like, this is also like, you can, a lot of teachers agree with me. You're a positionless position. That means you're free in space, liberated. We can be who we are, or who we want to be. And who do we want to be? Well, the whole point is to like go in accordance with those ontological relationships of karma. That doesn't mean governed by karma. It means that we are perceptually aware of it, that it exists in space, that it binds us, that we make karmically implicative choices with everything that we do, everything that we say, and everything that we think. It doesn't mean you have to live like a saint. That's not the point. Tantra is not about living like a saint, no matter what people on the internet say about monastics or people practicing black magic, what they will say about Tantra. It doesn't matter. Those opinions are extremes. You want to talk about extremity? Those two opinions are extremity. The tantric practice is householder practice. Doesn't mean you have to be married. I know we talked a lot about this in the early days of the lodge, and like what aeon of the daughter could mean, and there was like a lot of implications about me, and like about like Temple of Psychic Youth, and like how gender fluid, they wrote that text, and like all the stuff that happened. But I've always said it has nothing to do with that. It is zero to do with that. How do you want to live? And I think you should live, this is how I think of the aeon, is that you should live in a generative and productive way. What does that mean? I've always said, like, go figure it the fuck out for yourself. Don't come to me and look for moral answers on your life. And a lot of people in the early days did, unfortunately, sort of take static responses that I never really said, and they took of them and they understood them to be like I was giving some moral prescription for the life. I'm not like that. I've said Quicksilver Surfers. Someone who says Quicksilver Surfers does not give prescriptive ways to live your life. I am just saying that for me, I agree with Paracelsus. I think the base pair is male, female. That does not mean that heterosexuality is the only is the only expression of pairing, but it means that is just the normal, quote unquote, generative whatever, and that's just the typical one. That doesn't mean that that's the only one, and I never said that either. So I don't want to give anyone any kind of idea that I should be your moral arbiter. That's not correct at all. Like, I'll refute that. That is ultimate reality. I refute that I say anything that should be taken as like, this is how you should live morally. I think people should live aeonically. I've said this every space, pretty much, for 2.5 years. There are 3 aeons. Nuria, who can also be known as Kurkula, who is the goddess, pink goddess with the bow. She wears a turquoise garment, raiment, so heavenly, sort of like ephemeral garments, and then also a garland of skulls, and then she has green eyes. So we linked her to Hode or Path 22. That's what we said for the Aeon of the Daughter. So she is the daughter. Understand that how you want. She is the daughter of the heatless flame. She stands on the demon of desire, the demon of lust. So I think that you shouldn't do I don't think you should do degrading things. That's how I think, because that is her bija. Like we were talking about, like what makes the deity real. If the bija makes if the deity real, then her bija is the bija of self-respect. So number 1. So that's an easy aeonic thing. Okay. So love, yes, pursue that, but like it has to be like in self-respect. Okay. Aeon 2, Seth, who can also be called Vajra Kumara or just Kumara, depending. The sun, basically the wayward sun, with the warlock sun, the sorcerer sun. So basically, his thing is the will. The whole aeon is supposed to be love over will, but I also came to sort of change that later on, and I said it's love and will together, which I actually think is better. I think it's like those two things in synthesis. What can I do? What do I want? And defeating like the demon of lust, but then also like what demon stands under Kumara? The 5 or 6, it's the 6 skandhas, the 6 sense aggregates, but it's usually depicted as 5. Like we were talking about, like the 5 elements, and like how the Vedic gods are often depicted as the number 5 under the feet of tantric deities. So think about that. The deities can also, the Vedic deities or the Puranic deities can also be the demiurges. They can also be the aggregates. They can also be the sense perceptions, the misperceptions. That's what it really means. That's what tantric iconography really means. It's talking about how perception is so much up to us, just like we were talking about, like how the Dharma centers function. You know, like it's so agential. That's why I like the Ernst Younger thing. I don't think it's like so practical. I don't think people just like have all the resources in the world to like go completely transform themselves in their life like immediately. But I do think that there is an alchemical process. You can follow sadhana. You don't have to be Buddhist. I don't think that, and I've never said that. Of course, I think it's great if people want to practice Dharma, as I've always said, because I think Dharma is the best, and I think it's generative, and I think that is very much like what Hapaboria is. I think Hapaboria is a dharmic place. I think the wheel turning is here. I think the wheel turning is in our own minds, but I do think it's on the New World Island. That's another part of like being real and not real. Like the real secret third position, in my opinion, is to like acknowledge that it's both. That's truly non-dual. Say it's both. It's not that it's neither nor, which I always say. It's like that's the tantric logic, neither nor. And it is neither nor. It's neither real nor not real. It's both. It's up to us. It's up to our perception, our minds. But it's also like, it doesn't even really matter. We get to choose what matters. That's sort of like you want me to distillate it down into like a really easy pop culture, like aphorism, cheesy or otherwise. It's that we get to choose. And so I know it's not, and it is to transform yourself. That's what Tantra is. It's to transform yourself, transform your mind, number one. But I'll tell you some secret things. Well, this isn't super secret, but it's cool, I think. Your posture does change if you do mantra japa. Like you'll start to self-correct. You'll start to want to align the channels naturally. This is real. I'm telling. This is a real thing. I know I'm like very anti-psychic, very anti-supernatural usually, and all that stuff. Although I also believe in psychism. So, and I always joke about Temple of Psychic Youth and all that shit. But the reality is like, yeah, I do believe in it. I do believe in all those things. I just, is it useful for me to be like, I'm scared, or like this is really happening? I don't think that's useful. I just feel like I have had many of those crazy experiences, like we talked about, like way back in the summer. People were talking about like these insane psychic experiences. Like I was having them too. It's not about being shy or ashamed or anything, but it's also about how much do I want to like acknowledge that that thing is real. I might have perceived like a psychic experience happening. That doesn't mean I have to go talk about it on Twitter. I have to reconcile the polarities in myself. So I tried to do that. And I know that's also unsatisfactory for people because they think I don't acknowledge things. But I can only acknowledge like what is materially apparent. So that's another thing about non-dualism. So do you deny the matter or the spirit? Because it's both real. It's not nothing. Even if you say it's contained and there's luminousness and masslessness, the klipa can also be pristine. This is like a Dzogchen thing that Solar and I talked about for a long time. And like David DCS talks about this all the time. Like the klipa can be transparent. So if the klipa can be transparent and actually show the luminousness of light, then there's no problem that the vessel. And I'm talking about klipa with a K, not klipa with a Q. So we'll use Solar's framework. But like the vessel, there's no problem. A vessel made of glass or made of crystal or made of diamond or diamond thunder, that is both luminousness and massless at the same time, but it's also like it's as strong as a diamond. That's the whole point of like calling it, diamond thunder. It's adamantine. It's the process of adamantization. You are going beyond crystal. You're actually going into like the primordial substance. It's not Quicksilver. That's why I always said I reject Hermeticism at face value. Because I don't think it's about being hermetic. Yeah, I did say Quicksilver Surfer, meaning that the ocean, the start, like remember Sailor Moon? Just watch Sailor Moon. How many times have you heard me say that? Just watch Sailor Moon. It all makes sense. Mercury bubbles. It's the start of the ocean, but it's air. That's really the element of Mercury. So, but air doesn't start by itself. Air is a composite element. Air is composite of the 3 and 1, the 13, Hesed. Remember the heart of Hesed is Hod? Interesting, right? And Hod is supposedly so close to us. Air is supposedly so close to us. So then we, what? We draw on it. We surf the aether wave. Well, where do you think the aether wave begins? It begins at Hod, but it also begins at us because we are the origin part of all cause. Like if people stopped posting on Twitter tomorrow, that's it. No more. Twitter cannot be a cause. So I don't know. I don't like nothingness doctrine. I don't even know if I like emptiness. I love luminousness and masslessness. I will always keep that. But like emptiness doctrine, sunyata doctrine, and like the Japanese Buddhist texts prefer a radical compassion. That's what they call it, radical or wrathful compassion. Like Lotus Sutra, it's much more corrective. Like it's much less ephemeral. But that's like their kind of dharma. Like there's lots of different kinds of dharma. There's lots of different kinds of like ways to focus on it. But I really think if you stick with like a more middle path, but middle path not meaning centrist, meaning non-positionality, meaning non-reactive, non-polarized, not going with the camp, not going with the flow. I know that people will mostly not be able to do this, and there'll be mostly times in your life where you're like, I wish I could go against the grain, but I cannot. I'm not talking about like, but there is like a time where sometimes it's okay to go against it. Sometimes the polarity is actually pulling you in the opposite direction. But you have to always meet those things in the middle, is what I'm trying to say. And middle not is in the middle positionality. Again, that's why I'm saying like you can't be like, oh my god, I'm going along with society, like I'm a normbroid. Like we're all normbroids, okay, in some way. Like, we all wear clothes mostly, I think, and we're relatively normbroid. But we always said this was like a magician's space, and it's like a very esoteric. And yes, we always did like very intermediate Kabbalah, all that. Talk about Dharma at a very high level. I didn't really realize, I honestly didn't realize it was high level. I'm not kidding. I see you, Moonblade, but I'm not kidding. Like I thought this is how everybody spoke about Tantra and about Dharma, about magic. I honestly considered myself like total normie, like total magical normie. Like I'm not doing anything different. But then I started to see like, wow, there are some serious differences. There are some ways that my way of articulating it, at least, maybe it's not even difference in the way of thinking. Like to go back to like Eros's point about Kamba, like in Dzogchen, like maybe it's all just like different conceptual ways of like transmitting what doesn't even matter. And like if you listen to my teacher, like Jumi Pom Rinpoche, who everybody can go read for free, lotsawahouse.org. It's all there for you. Just look up Jumi Pom Rinpoche. You can read all his teachings. He said he was going to the Dakini Pure Land. So to to Dakini, that's what he said. He was like, I'm out of here. He was like, y'all are. He said, y'all Nagas are morons. Basically, he's like, I'm out of here. I'm going with the Dakini. And so I guess that's what happened. Probably the Skywife took him away. But what I'm trying to say is that I think it's a lot messier, it's a lot weirder, and it's a lot more ineffable. Just like life can be very ineffable. Like, how do you express the complexities of like thought, material reality, internal reality, alchemical reality, all three bodies? How do you explain them all at the same time? What container are you using? It's very difficult. And if you don't think it's difficult, I challenge you to do it by starting your own show. So, it's not necessarily like people act like putting out content makes you somehow an arbiter of anything. It doesn't. It doesn't make you a great speaker, doesn't make you cooler, doesn't make you anything. Doesn't make you shit, really. And you want to know how I know that? Because I've met a lot of podcasters. I'm not putting anyone down, and there's directed at no one in particular. Really, it isn't. I just see a lot of like bullshit. And so I agree that I'm not anything special in that. But I do agree that maybe my way of articulating it is different. But I've always considered myself Dharmic. I've always tried to relay to you guys, like, I'm Dharmic. My perspective is always going to be that. Yeah, it's left-hand path Dharma, for sure. Even my preference for enlightened beings and all my jokes about skywives, everybody infamously knows, dakinis are inherently non-dual. So they're luminous and massless in and of themselves. And they're extremely powerful. And so I just think, I mean, that's basically the point. That's basically the point of all this, is like, I come from that perspective. I'm not against supernaturalism. I'm not against like whatever paganism. If that's what you want to follow, then that's what you got to follow. If you want to follow Christianity, if you want to be a from Jew, that's fine. If you want to do like Egyptian shit, if you want to do like left-hand path shit, like, I can't stop you. I'm not gonna be like, but don't look to me and be like, yeah, can you condone this? I don't really give a fuck. If you want really my religion opinion, not hiding behind anything, I don't really care. If you want me to pray for you, I'll pray for you. You want me to give you like some kind of fraternal advice? I'm your dude. I'll answer your fraternal, like your inquiries into something. No problem. I love doing that. That's why I started the show. Wasn't to make money. Definitely not to make money, because I pay out over $100 a month to do everything. So it's definitely not making money. I don't even have anything monetized. And I don't want to, and never will be. And that was part of the whole idea of it being dharmic and chaotic at the same time. It's free in space. Hokmah. And it's up to you, the perceivers, the witnesses to consciousness, the witnesses to reality, whatever that is, non-dual, maybe. It's up to you to create Dath. Dath isn't some Sephira on a tree. DCS is totally right, but I didn't get it from DCS. I got it from Sephirotic experience. Dath can appear at every Sephira, and if you can go back and listen to those Aeon of the Daughter Spaces, you will hear me say, Dath is Diamond Thunder. Dath is Rigpa. Dath is Primordial Consciousness. This was before our brother got into Zarchin. So I wonder if that was like a part of the seeding of a ghost, you could say. But yeah, I think that Dath is something that is created in your consciousness. I don't think it's a Sephira external to you. But I also think it's Pluto, which we have discussed many times. I just think the planets are the Klipas. The Klipas aren't inherently evil. The Klipas just mean like what is the aggregated material. That's all Klipa is, with a K. It's just aggregated material. It's like the land is composed of aggregates of rock, crystal, shell, plant life, insects, all of that. Well, what is true earth? Well, then that is a tantric problem. So we have what ways to reconcile true earth. It's the same with fire. Fire is considered the most pristine element. Can't really be tainted. But actually, in the Vedic conception, can be tainted. You can apply, and this is also Zoroastrian, you can apply the flame to an unclean thing, like a corpse. This is what gives Tantra the reputation of antinomianism. But it's not really. You're taking the fallen methodology, the methodology that didn't last, that didn't work, that in and of itself was an animal sacrifice and blood cult. That's what certain stages of Zoroastrianism were. They were worshiping demons. They were worshiping Garudas. They would call them like Pazuzu. That's a Garuda. No difference. Yeah, even the directionality of how they assign the wind kings, same as in Tantric Buddhism, same as in Bonpo. Very similar. It's very easy to see if you know the iconography. So they were doing wild shit. So Tantra can't be antinomian, can't be transgressive. It can be transgressive, and it is transgressive to wild shit. So it took a wild methodology, conceptual way to understand time, the body, reality, and what arises in the carnal ground. Because I've always talked about this. The carnal ground in the medieval period, when people were actually writing tantras, was filled with criminals, with black magicians, with crazy people, homeless people, outcast people, tantrics, desperate people looking for ritual solutions to their like mundane problems. No electricity, no radio, no telephone, just them and the carnal ground, them and the carnal fire, the corpse burning. So, like, think about it. You're a Buddhist, because we're going to use a Dharmic framework. You're Buddhist, you're at Terapeeth Temple. Years, like, we'll still give it a magic number, 1313 AD. Although the sun has gone down, just setting, just starting to set. There's a little pink left on the horizon. And you are standing in front of a burning body. And so you start to pray with your mala. You have a mala, simple mala, doesn't have to be complex. Doesn't have to be like a crazy expensive mala. Like I've talked about this. I use a Rudraksha mala. That's good enough for me. It's good enough. Well, yeah, I mean, you can choose what's good enough for you, but I think it's good enough for everybody. So it's good enough for me. Anyway, so Rudraksha mala, and you're staring and you're starting to recite. You're starting to recite the names of God. You could say that. Starting to recite the names of the goddess. Reciting. What you're watching the fire burn, the corpse burn in front of you. That's Tantra. That's all it is. How can that be transgressive? Because really what you're trying to do is reconcile and rectify the words that you're speaking in the impure flame, because you also know that the words that you're speaking are impure. So why are you going to transmute words into a pure flame? It's also an allegory for the mind. I know this sounds very facile. This sounds very Buddhist. This sounds very Tibetan, actually. What I'm about to say, I can't even believe I'm saying it. It's also an allegory for your own mind. You're reciting the words which are not pure. It's not because the words themselves aren't pure or that you're not pronouncing them correctly. It's not being like an autist of words. It's that your mind isn't pristine. So the words themselves cannot also be pristine until you start recognizing what they mean. That's what Tantra is. It's to reconcile the words that were broken. The words were broken. You can use the Tower of Nimrod. It's the exact same thing. We have Havajra, who is exactly the same as the Nimrod character, the king of the sky, the dark blood. His name is even like he is an emanation of the void mirror Buddha. Void mirror, you mean like the space, the black blue space that exists above us, the void mirror Buddha. So he is like a version of the void mirror Buddha. And he wears he holds all the zodiacs, the 13 zodiacs, in his skull cups, and he holds all the vahanas, the vehicles of the planets, in his other skull cups. Stands on Brahma, Indra, Rudra, and Narayana, we'll say. It could be Shiva, I can't remember. I honestly can't remember. But he stands on all of them, and then his consort is Naraimya. She is Quicksilver. That's even how the sadhana describes it. She is made of Quicksilver. So when she arises, she can take the existence appearance of who? Well, that's really interesting, because Kurkula is her primary appearance existence Dakini, which means that Kurkula is also Naraimya. So that also goes along with what appearance existence is. Just because something appears as something, so it appears, she still appears as enlightened force. So what's the difference? What is the difference? Really, ask yourself that. Kurkula appeared. Are you going to say to her, oh, I don't want to talk to you. I want to speak to Naraimya. I want what Varupa had. Varupa had many experiences with Naraimya. And so, is that what you're going to say? So, I mean, that's interesting. Maybe she'd react in an interesting way, because Dakinis are not deities, right? And that's the whole thing. It's like they're perfectly non-dual. So they of themselves are aware that they're not devas, but they also are aware that they have a higher degree of control over reality, which is also made of light, which is also made of sound, which is why I say that there is something. There is something, and that is ineffable, because it's light and sound and something else, a secret third thing, perception. It's pretty simple, really, once you start to really break down what all of the systems of Tantra are. Jain Tantra, Sikh Tantra, all of it. It's about luminousness, mantra, sound, and consciousness. And that's how to rectify and reconcile yourself and the world. I hope everybody can find that. Like, it's not about finding like eternal bliss. I reject eternalist frameworks. I always have. And this is part of like not being why I'm not Christian and why I'm not Abrahamic in general. Like, at all. Like, yeah, I love Kabbalah. I respect its Jewish like heritage, and I always talk about like Rebbe Nachman and Rabbi Cordovero are my biggest influences Kabbalistically, and David, obviously. But the reality is like I'm not Jewish, so I don't approach the tree in that way. I don't relate to it in that way. Oh, and Sachki, obviously, sorry, and Sailor Moon. So five, like just like a pillar, right? Just like the 4 pillars, but there's not 4 elements in Tantra. There are 5. Actually, I was talking with Vanessa like probably a couple hours ago about this. There's only 5 elements in Tantra. But interestingly, if you classify, so you can say that each element is also represented by as a Buddha of a specific color. This is kind of interesting. Every Buddha has a consort. So we're talking about like how to reconcile the idea of the female arising. Well, every Buddha has his breath. Every Buddha has his consort, right? So there's actually 5 positions. There's actually 10 Buddhas in the mandala. And how many directions are there in Tantra? 10, as I said. The 8 directions outside of you and the 2 polarities within you, which are vertical. But they're also inside of you, and they also don't have to go anywhere. You can, like I know one of the sick ways of visualizing it is to have the light descend. This is also very tantric. We were talking about Maritzi, Mithras. The light, she descends as the light. Her boars, the whole idea of the boars is that through their sound, like that, like kind of squeal, they can shift matter so it liberates the light that's trapped within. That's the whole point of like the boars. Like you'll see her with like the little piglets pulling her corpse cart. That's what she's riding. She's riding a corpse cart because she's recognizing that the world is a carnal ground. She's like serving sort of in a way as a psychopomp, but it's not really. It's not really. That's I'm gonna say that, and then I know I'm gonna regret it in 2 weeks. They'll be like, Jin said this, that Maritzi is a psychopomp. No, I don't think she's a psychopomp in the sense that she's not guiding souls. It's about guiding the thread, the invisible, delicate thread of karma, and letting the people in hell, which can also be understood to be us. I'm not saying we each live in hell, but the mind can be a very much like a prison and held conditions, carnal ground conditions. And people's lives can be very much of carnal ground conditions. That is no secret to anyone who has existed on Twitter for more than 10 minutes. She is to remind those people that exist in hell. They are actually bound by not bound. When I'm saying bound, I'm not talking about like bound as in like it's in some way an implication to your limitlessness. It's that we are bound to each other in perception and through love. One of the key words of the Aeon. So this even goes back to the 3rd. I know you guys thought I meandered really far off the reservation this time, but I really didn't, because that is Zoe. That is Zoe, who is the 3rd Aeon, who is the Aeon of life force. The descending light is life force. So life force, love, and will. So if you can like somehow reconcile what those 3 things mean for yourself, that is truly living aeonically. And you should also consider all of reality a hermeneutic. All of reality is an ARG, but it doesn't have to be. That's a choice. That's a choice to consider things as game theory rather than as like people with like hearts and minds that like have karmic connections that do actually matter, that do exist. Right? The whole point is not to be anti-cosmic, as in like rejecting form or embracing formlessness as like a specific ontological state. You're not supposed to embrace formlessness. It's supposed to be that it comes and goes. It's ephemeral. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of non-duality. Non-dualism can come and go. Sometimes you recognize things for the matter that it is, and sometimes you recognize it for the bullshit that it is. And how do you do that? Well, you cultivate yourself, and then you work on your own mind. It's not antinomian, as I said, with the body. How can you, if you come from a blood cult who is like, it's all about like sacrificing things so you get what you want to maintain the king, to maintain the city. Like, I understand that a lot of Twitter wanted to go back to that for like 2 years, but like in reality, 2026, are we moving back to like a place where it's going to be like, let's invoke these deities, which may or may not be of our mind, which may or may not be higher or lower forces? Does it even matter? Are they like untamed spirits from the carnal ground? Are we doing something karmically implicative? Well, Dharma would say yes. Dharma would say that that is very karmically implicative. So if the point is to be liberated from the shackles of the archons, of course the archons start in our own mind and they might exist outside of it. Maybe the planets are minor archons. That's a very tantric way to think about it. So what I'm saying is like it's really up to us. What we think matters, where we place our time and attention, care, love, and recognition. And as I said, like my whole thing with Threshold Saints was sort of not as like a gatekeeper in any way, but I thought, wow, it's so interesting that I could call this idea, which I have often explained it like several times, what Threshold Saints means. And sometimes I give a different answer. Sometimes I'll give the Rebbe Nachman Messiah principle, like you have to tell people that they're saints. This is the same as Buddha nature. As some arguments like DCS would argue that, and I've given that explanation. And sometimes I'll say it's a reference to Xian, which are Chinese saints or Chinese immortals, and they exist on like a mountain, but they also exist in this place called the Jianghu, the rivers and the lakes, sort of reflection of the world. But what world is real? Is the watery realm real, or is the human realm real? What is real? So that was also the idea. So, but I think it's both. I think it's the idea of that you have to tell people that they are saints or that they have Buddha nature, that it can arise within them no matter the degradation of their lives. I mean, I'm not a Theravadan. That's the truth. I don't like look to generate through death and decay. You know, I look to generate through recognizing that a fertile field may also have been, not necessarily I'm making, but has been a corpse ground. That's what non-dualism really is. Like when we're all getting ready to garden, or some of us have started if you live in a warmer place than me, which is fine. But it's the recognition of like what soil is. It's decomposition, but it's using to grow new things. That's Tantra. You think gardening can't be Tantra? Gardening can be Tantra. Depends what you're thinking. If you're thinking a mantra while you're gardening, you're performing a sadhana. So think about that. Think about why we talked about so many times in the, early to middle part of the spaces was about single pointed will, the Seth, the tip of the sword, the point of the spear. It's not the point, but it's the point, right? Like the Dharmapala, the protector, the wrathful practices. It's not even about a deity. The wrathful practices are not the point, but there are a defense and an offense against things that would disrupt our like kind of dharmic lives, or like our kind of dharmic obligations, or our kind of like dharmic growth, like process theology. We're infinitely in the process of becoming or being, and God is in our perception, is in that diamond thunder, that watching the lightning strike upon the lake, that or upon an ocean. That's even better. If you can witness that, one time in your life, lightning across an ocean, just keep that image in your mind. That's why I post it. So people can start to see it and be like, actually, God is kind of real. Because there is something there. There is something. It doesn't matter what you believe. I'm not talking about like necessarily even Abrahamic God. Just talking about like something ineffable. Something so unbelievable. Love. Unconditional love. It exists there. But it's also wrathful. It's also powerful. It's also ephemeral, meaning it comes and goes like lightning. That's the whole point. That's why I would post like a picture of Diamond Thunder. It's to remind you, like, yeah, it exists. Just because we're on the internet and everything's bullshit, you have all these Tantra people now. I'm so annoyed by it. I'm so annoyed by but I should be happy, right? Like, this is what I did for like 3 years, was post tantra when nobody understood what I was talking about, when I was like feeling like it was futile, like my show, doing the spaces. I was like, nobody knows what the fuck I'm talking about. I feel like I'm talking like normgroid English, and everyone's saying it's too hard to understand, and I'm too conceptual, and I'm too this. And I know it shouldn't matter what the perceptions of others really thinks, or really, it doesn't really matter. But it did matter because I was trying to do it so other people could like see that there is something else, instead of being like nihilist. Because you have to think, like, out of COVID, everybody was a fucking like black pill. Everybody was like, we're like going to, we're walking into like into hell. We're opening the ninth gate. We're opening the portals, like, or we're doing something in space. Like, it's all bullshit. All that stuff is bullshit. All those narratives are bullshit. The Iran war it's fucking bullshit. I'm sorry. That media is total, like, it's just propaganda narrative. I'm not talking about like boomer IG, Insta slop, podcaster. Like, any podcast like that talks about like, oh, all narratives are psyop. No, it's a psyop if you want it to be, if you believe in it. I choose to believe in nothing, but not nothing. I choose to believe in dharma, karma, love, will, and life. The Aeon of the Daughter. So I just remember that when I feel like shit. I just think Aeon of the Daughter. There's something else. And you have to see where the arrow is pointing. And I'm not saying it's always right. There has been a time in the last year where I thought the arrow was pointing somewhere. But I don't think it is. But that's okay, because it's just in perception, right? It's all ephemeral, like a flower. It can come and go. And that's totally okay. Even though it's painful and it's hard at times. And I'm saying this is like, oh, it's like a flower, you can let it go. No, it's not really like that. But I'm trying to give you a metaphor for understanding reality. See, it's not about the situation. It's not about anything to do with that. But when we did the Aeon of the Daughter spaces initially, we talked about how much is like you can liken everything to a flower, a 5-petal flower, specifically a mallow, specifically a pink mallow. Because what is pink? Pink is diamond thunder. Pink is the silver sparkling, the silver tinseling, the not diamond thunder. I already said that. I apologize. The crystal millennia. The crystal millennia kingdom from Sailor Moon. That's what pink is. Really, I'm not making it up. Pink doesn't exist. We put pink onto that color. But that's why pink is extra special. Because it's showing us that Maya is beautiful and the actual reality is also beautiful. But we can't always perceive the actual reality. But we can recognize its outer appearance existence. That's what pink is. It's the contour to the truth. It's the pink flower with the yellow corona. But it comes together in a white center. That is the basis. That is Yesod. Rises up to Tiferet, the dialectical relationship between the 5 and the 6. The primordial consciousness and the will. And how is that sort of brought into synthesis? Through love and the word. The son and the daughter. Very interesting. Very grail. I know I promised all of you that I would have like a cool thing in the AppCon thing, but it didn't happen. That's okay. We're gonna move forward. I'll submit something next episode, or next edition. We'll see. But I think that we laid out the framework. I think the Aeon of the Daughter is motherfucking real. I've said this the whole time. I said it was speculative, but but I believe it, and I do believe it. But I actually think it's more important than ever that I tell everyone that would listen to this, even if they think it's bullshit, and that's totally fine. You can think it's bullshit, but I think it's important that I tell you that I actually believe it, because I actually do, and I think it gives you that triangular framework to build all of reality. Because what are two triangles? Two triangles are a square. But a square is not 4 points, it's actually 5. As I said with the mandala, 5 points is really 10. Right? So square, circle, and a circumpunct. That is the nature of all reality. So figure that the fuck out for yourselves, Sagas. Anyways, that was pretty much it. I know I went on for a long riff. It's so crazy because we have such a tight-knit group chat. Like, I'm including you, Moonblade, obviously, even though you don't chat that much, but we are such, like, we're so close on the timeline, and I know I could DM you if I needed anything. So, like, we're obviously close homies is what I'm saying. But what I'm saying broadly is, like, the nature and the composition of the group has changed a lot, but it's actually become a lot. There's an ease to that we can do this, that we can talk about things in a much more realistic way, a much more like real life way, and not be so stuck in like polarities of supernaturalism. Like, a lot of the early times for the lodge was about how I would get into like these crazy timeline fights with like multiple people at the same time, and I would use tantric iconography to sort of subjugate them. I mean, I knew what I was doing. I mean, we all knew what I was doing. I mean, let's let's not be naive here. But now everyone's a tantra poster, everyone's a Buddha poster, everyone posts, and that's fine. That's great. We want the dispersion of dharma, but we also have to remember, like, it does matter, and there should be some kind of reflection of ourselves. Like, I know Eros was giving me a hard time about my fit posts. My fit posts are actually exactly how I would dress if I had like infinite money. If I had infinite money, I would be walking around in a different pair of slides, expensive like Gucci slides, and like $160 silk socks every day. Martin Margiela. I really would. Tons of bling. I'd have all my, like, I have a lot of Thai amulets already, but like I would have so many more. I would definitely have rollies. I mean, I would like that, but it's conceptual too. But it's a reflection of like actually how I actually dress. That is the truth. Like, I wear mostly black. I wear a lot of skatewear. Double Taps is my favorite brand, the Japanese brand. I wear a lot of raw denim. And that's basically it. So, like, the fit posts are me, but as Eros said, it's like, she was like, it's a lie, but I'm like, it's not a lie. It's just like, I don't have infinite money. I can't dress like, and I also don't carry like Wing Chun butterfly blades around with me at all times. Maybe I do, maybe I don't, but I'm just saying. I don't carry Bali songs or any illegal things, or, I was thinking about doing guns on them at one point, but I was like, I don't know about that. But I think it would make a cool look, a cool fit. So, it's part of the whole point of the story is that things are real and meaningful, and they should actually be reflexive. And I actually have been contemplating this idea of why people copied me. And I don't mean in like the way that that's okay. I mean in the way that it was like about taking away from me what I had sort of like written, or words I had come up with, or ideas I had talked about on spaces. Like, why were some writers on Substack writing episodes of their Substack paid Substack? I'm talking about paid Substack. They would write Substack things in the first person, talking about the exact thing that they had come to listen to a cargo, like to her Grey Lodge. Like, why would people do that? And all I can think is especially at the beginning, this obviously has changed as I become more immersed with people, which is also the negative of doing that. But you at least initially, I had that self-reflexive element to not really give a shit what other people liked, and to be able to be like, I am completely my own person. And so that's part of what the fits are too. It's part of like, I don't like when people on the timeline are talking about like, we must be Ralph Lauren nationalists. Like, to me, that is total bullshit. I'm not going backwards aeonically. I'm going with the daughter. I'm following the arrow, following the sword, and I'm following the chariot that is also light. For me, that is the way I want to live my life. That is the aeon of generation. What did those three things mean? It's up to you. I think live in a, dharmic way, a karmically productive way. I don't think being an annihilationist or an anti-cosmic is the point. This is where like normie Buddhism really comes in handy. Nirvana is samsara, and it's the hardest lesson, but it's also like the best lesson in a way, because it's unsatisfying. But then you realize, like, yeah, there are tantric models to navigate and maneuver around reality. So that's an opportunity if people want to do that. But as I said, everything in reality is a bit of a hermeneutic, if you choose to believe it. So with that being said, I'm going to do a room shout out. Thank you so much, Dr. Joshua, Dr. William Birkin, Joshua the Branch. Thank you to our brother Solar Exile, who was really good tonight, but I mean, sometimes his absolute like ideas are quite extreme for me. But he did really great, so shout him out. Yes, he is appearing on Saints pretty soon, a couple times, 2 times, which isn't crazy. But and Joshua has an episode that will be coming out really soon. Okay, so it will come out actually before Solars, so he can go cry harder. Anyways, Moonblade, thank you so much, brother. My Hapaborean, Judeo Hapaborean brother. I'm not Judeo Hapaborean. I'm just giving Moonblade a hard time. Dumento Mori, thank you so much for coming. We'll try and record this weekend. Let me know in DM, and I appreciate it. And hopefully, like, we'll get that done, and then you can start coming up if you want. Frau Blocher, thank you. Amazing poet. Amazing person. Proud. I'm very proud that she's an RGC. She could be with way cooler people. Obviously, shout out Sachki. We love Sachki. Those 3 episodes were really amazing. They captured like such a point in my. I was really feeling sad and really down, and it was like quite a fun New Year's. So thank you so much, Sachki. If you're out there in the Aether Wave, shout out to the Moon Princess. Of course, we have to shout out our own Moon Princess, Cassandra, who is also Chibi Yusa, who is also the Aeon of the Daughter, who is also the Aeon of Love. So Nuria, the most important Aeon of the 3 Aeons. Just saying. They're all important, and maybe they all are in equilibrium, equipoise. It's very Buddhist, right? But in some ways, it's the arrow that tells us, just like pink is the contour of the truth, it is the arrow that tells us where the truth is. So you follow the arrow. So that's what I recommend. So thank you so much, Cassandra. Please check out her Etsy, her YouTube, and just everything that she wants to do, and her services, Spotless Tarot on IG. And if you need her IG, I'm sure she'll link it or something. We'll figure it out, okay? Don't message her, but we'll figure it out. Anyways, great. Thank you. Thank you, Al, my other favorite poetry buddy, my sparring partner, I think you're Korean, but I'm not sure. Maybe you're an alt, maybe you're not. I don't know. But I do know that you're Canadian. I think you're Canadian, and I think we have a great time on the timeline. And that is sometimes the most important thing, is to have a great time on the timeline. And so thank you for doing that and allowing us to play and dance in the space of emptiness, which is not to say nothingness, but luminousness and masslessness, which is also the motherfucking pixels on your screen. Thank you, Elie. I appreciate it. I don't know who you are. You've got a bunch of Greek. I don't speak Greek in any meaningful way, but I appreciate you, and I like your name. It's very Francais. I do speak Francais because I'm actually also Francais, but we won't get into that today. I know that if I spoke French, that I would never hear the end of it on the space, because I do have a minor Quebecois accent. But it's not like super pronounced. It's not like you can watch CBC and I don't sound like anything like those people on the sitcoms. I have a much more neutral, you could call it transatlantic French accent. So, but I do have a minor Quebecois accent. It doesn't bother me at all. But it seems to bother a lot of people on, especially like right-wing Twitter, who like consider themselves like very trad and stuff. Like they just think like, oh, you're French, you must be like, or Quebecois, you must be like the lowest of the low. That's fine. I get more shit for being Quebecois than I do for being Chinese. That's what's so funny about Twitter. I used to get a lot of shit for being Chinese, but now I get more shit for being Quebecois. Hapaboreans can't win. We never can win. We're always like this thing. That's why I always said I was so lucky I grew up Indonesian. I know I said we're closing, and we are. But I am lucky in that way. Because we were always told, like, you're Eurasian. You belong with us. You're like our people. You're like part of it. Like, that is the truth. That is how it's understood. And so that's where my ideas of like the world, the aeon, the race, all of that came from. It was not being like, it's not about being extreme. It's really about like understanding things. And I came to understand myself as more American, as just like belonging on Hyperborea. And so those early days, those early experiences of my Hyperborean life, which was a show on MTV, obviously. I'm just kidding. People won't even know what I'm talking about. There was a Claire Danes series that was very seminal. It's called My So-Called Life. Anyways, I tried to do a wordplay. It didn't work. Okay. But my Hyperborean life, basically those early days, it came to now inform like how I see a lot of the world, like very non-dual, flexible, Hyperborean. We exist on the primordial ground. It's always there. It is always there. It's not somewhere secret. It's not somewhere hidden. It is hidden. I'm sorry, it is hidden within the heatless flame, which is our own samadhi consciousness. Isn't that interesting? Okay, just hit 22 for me. So good night, guys. Thank you so much. Amazing space. Plus ultra baby. Magic's motherfucking real. Go out and consent. Go out and love life and will. Get that motherfucking stack. And don't let anyone fuck with you. Use raffle magic if you need to. But I also think that you should be tempered in your execution of those things. Good night, Nagas.